John O'Connor is from Kalamazoo, Michigan. His recent book, The Secret History of Bigfoot, Field Notes on a North American Monster, explores the obsessive world of Bigfoot believers. His essays have appeared in the New York Times, Oxford American, Gentleman's Quarterly, Creative Nonfiction's True Story series, and elsewhere. He teaches journalism at Boston College. His upcoming book traces a historical path from Terence and Dennis McKenna's experiment at La Chorrera to our current psychedelic moment. And he is one of the few people that I've talked to in recent memory who actually has revisited La Chorrera as it exists now, which has led to this podcast interview. I am more than pleased to welcome John O'Connor to the Brain Forest Cafe. John, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me, Dennis.
A little background. Well, we read a little background. You've done a great deal of travel writing, adventure writing, and what led you to get interested in the La Chorrera story and actually go to La Chorrera, which is no small thing?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We were talking about before we came on, you mentioned this this kind of adventure travelogue I'd written about Antarctica and the kind of the early explorers there, Robert Falcon Scott and other folks like that. And I really am drawn to those adventure narratives. And that's kind of how I see Terence's book and this whole experiment at La Chorrera adventure and sort of multiple meanings of the word. And, and when I read Terence's book, I have to admit it was not what I expected it to be. I had owned it for a while, and I'm ashamed to say it sat on my shelf unread, and I pulled it off the shelf one day and started reading and was instantly struck by his just gift at kind of linear narrative. And I was just surprised that I had really little inkling of who he was. I kind of knew where he was because I knew about Roger Casement. I had read Michael Tausig's book on shamanism, and he talked a little bit about Walt Hardenberg and Roger Casement and the rubber atrocities in the Putumayo in the early 20th century. And
right.
And when I found that out, I was like, that's really like, why haven't I heard of McKenna? And why haven't I heard of this book? And why is not more made of this place and this connection? And so that was part of it, and also just my inkling for adventure narrative. I've kind of, my bread and butter over the years has been travel writing, and especially this intersection of kind of landscape and literature. And so I've written about, the Antarctica and the early historians of that period, and I've written about Peter Matheson in the Florida Everglades, and Ernest Hemingway in northern Michigan, and so on. And so I thought of this as another kind of piece of that. But once I got into it, I realized how much of a story it was, and what a bigger and potentially meatier story it was. And I knew right away that I had to go there. I'd never been to South America. I'm also embarrassed to say, and I knew that I wanted to see that place where you guys had been and see what had changed in the last half century.
Yeah, in the last 50 years, yes. I'm a fan of Peter Matheson's myself, very much so, and this kind of writing. And of course, you're familiar with his book, The At Play in the Fields of the Lord, which in my opinion is probably the best novel about the Amazon ever written. I put it right up there with Wade Davis's book, One River, which is nonfiction, but between those two, I think they're both monumental work. And Wade and I have been good friends for many years. I recently did a podcast with him, and he's another person who just has done incredible adventures, and has not, there's nothing egotistical about it. He just does these things. This is what he does. And Schulte, his mentor, was similar in his approach to this. It wasn't that either one of these guys, that they visualized themselves as some kind of swashbuckling Indiana Jones sort. I mean, they were just explorers. And in Schulte's cases, well, I'm a plant collector. I got to go where the plants are. and, and he went to these crazy places and had all these amazing adventures, which Wade chronicled in his book. Our narrative, the experiment at La Chorrera, which is chronicled probably best by Terence's book, True Hallucinations, when I compare it to your tales about these Arctic explorers, it seems like ours was not, I mean, our trip was a rough trip for sure, but physically we were never in the kind of danger that these explorers were in. We went to a place, we were driven by a vision, the search for the secret, whatever it was. The secret turned out to be this incredibly prolific field of mushrooms, which was not what we were looking for when we started out, but when we got there, as you know from the book, we definitely got distracted and seriously distracted. And, and that story is told in True Hallucinations. So, it was a kind of a heart of darkness story, I suppose, that we came, and I was 20 when we went there. My brother was 24. And we were at that stage of life, when one thinks they know a lot and actually they know nothing, And so we had these adventures. But tell me what got you interested in enough in this whole Amazon's area and this whole story to actually go to La Chorrera, and what has that been like?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was hoping we could compare notes because you said yours was a rough trip, and I only got an inkling of that El Encanto to La Chorrera trail, and enough to put me off of it for sure. I mean, I think we got 100 and 150 feet in. Now, we started at a different location. We were kind of told there was a shortcut, so we journeyed upriver about 130 something kilometers and started at a second point at another point, and we were told that by our guide that it'd be about a day hike to El Encanto, and we got about 100 or so feet, 150 feet in, and we were up to our waists in water, and it was just a snarl of vines, and I couldn't have imagined a full day on that trail, let alone the 4 days that you guys did. So I was like duly impressed by that you guys did that. Now you're in your 20s and I'm 50, so it's you had a bit of advantage over me, but still I've done a fair amount of backcountry camping in my day, and that was like nothing I'd ever seen before. So I was really
the trail might have been very much degraded too by the time you got it. I understand. I'm not sure about the historical truth of this, but you may be able to shed some light on it. But I understand there was actually a railroad that was built to bring rubber out of La Chorrera down to El Encanto, which is where we started. Did you start on the trail from El Encanto?
I did the reverse journey. I had the luxury of flying in and out of La Chorrera, where there is now a landing strip, and there has been for a decade or so. And there are two flights a week there.
Flights a week?
I'm sorry. There are 2 flights a month officially, but there are actually, we discovered two more flights every week on cargo planes. So we flew in on a Colombian airline, and then we flew out caught a ride on a cargo plane out, and that guy comes twice a week. And so we had that luxury. And my original intention was to do the reverse of what you guys did and hike from La Chorrera to El Encanto, and then take a speedboat, what they call a rapido, up to Puerto Leguizamo. There, you might be interested to know, there lives John Brown's grandson. Ramiro Rojas Brown lives in this very same house that John Brown lives in. And I hope to meet him there and interview him. And that was my hopes there were dashed, unfortunately. I did eventually get to talk with him on the telephone, but but that was my intent. It was to do the kind of reverse journey you guys did, and in many ways, it was obviously much easier. The air flight is much different in your day. It was much different when you guys were there, but the trail was inoperable, and as far as we were concerned, and it was also, we were warned that there were Farc rebels, like a spin-off Farc group along the main branch of the Putumayo there.
What were the dates of this visit, John? When were you there?
Early December. So 10 days in the early part of December. I think we left. We flew out.
Last year?
Yeah, last year. Yeah,
last year. So
yeah.
this is very recent.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, you did it the other way. I mean, what great effort. We walked this trail from El Encanto. We encountered this crazy anthropologist there who was very unhappy that we had showed up, and back in those days, you couldn't send a text or even make a phone call. It's just his colleagues in Bogota had told us that Dr. Collier would be at El Encanto working with his people. So we show up, in full hippie regalia. I mean, this was 1970, 71. So, beards, beads, my brother insisted that everybody wear these white linen clothes that he'd adopted when he was butterfly hunting in Indonesia. So we were a colorful bunch, far more colorful than any of the Witotos, and he was quite appalled, And then when we got there and we said, we're here to look for Ukuhé, this legendary hallucinogen, which we'd read about in a paper of Schulte's. And he was really upset then because he said, "Oh my God, you're not even supposed to know this. This is their biggest secret. They'll undoubtedly kill you if you even mention this." He was a little bit hyped up on coca. I mean, he was constantly chewing coca, and he was quite paranoid. And we sort of said, okay, yeah, we understand, we get it. We won't just walk in there and demand Ukuhé. We'll be cool, Doc. And we were. We went up there and we hung around for a while, and then while we were waiting for the so-called secret to be brought by someone, this Ukuhé, the mushrooms were there, and we knew what they were. We had very little experience with them, but we knew what they were. And we thought, well, these will be fun. We can play with these while we wait for the real secret. And then they quickly made it clear they were the real secret and started, downloading all this information to us. And it's like La Chorrera was this magical Shangri-La type of place. The rains were constant. The mist would come over the pasture every morning, and we could go out and see that there were many, many mushrooms that grown up during the night. And it was just this, it was a kind of a, some of it was the physical environment, which was very magical, and some of it was the psychological environment, what we were projecting onto that as being this place where, there dwelt this cosmic, extraterrestrial, we weren't sure what, intelligence that was speaking to us through the mushrooms. And we were anything but skeptical, we were quite open to it. I imagine that when you visited La Chorrera, well, you said the cattle are long gone, the mission is long gone, if whatever pasture was there is now grown over. So it's kind of lost its magic. It's not this magical place.
Yeah. Well, it is still quite a magical place, but not in the way that you mean it. It was, it is an earthly paradise. I mean, it is just unbelievably beautiful. And it is, it's still far off the tourist map. There's no infrastructure there for tourism. You have to fly in and out. Like it's a 2-hour flight from Leticia, but it's still, there's no hotels. They're not set up for people. So
right.
It's like there's no air conditioning. It's not it's still a pretty rough place in many ways, but it's but yeah, but but it is still a paradisical place, just really magical in a lot of ways. And you know, you have the falls there, the Chorro,
Right.
and it's just a beautiful landscape. They're right at the edge of the Amazon, and which didn't exist. What didn't exist when you guys were there was Predio Putumayo, which is this huge Indian reserve that the Indians are more or less autonomous, and they're essentially untouchable by the national government. They don't have any interest in national politics for good reason. They pretty much do what they want to do, and it's huge. I mean, it's something like 15 million acres or something like that, which just to give you a sense of scale, like Yosemite, which is the largest national park in the lower 58, is 2.2 million acres. So it's just a vast wilderness that they more or less have to themselves. And, you know,
So,
to be fair,
the government has set this area aside?
Yep. In the new constitution in 1991, there were established several dozen Indian reserves. I can't remember the number now, but there are a substantial percentage of the national territory. It's like 12 or 13% or something like that. Way more than what you were here, but it's a lot. And so
to hear that was done. I think, you know, Schulte's had a great deal of influence in Colombia, you know, and urged them to create these selva reservists, so to speak. And you know, as Andy Weil once said, as far as in Colombia, Schulte's es Dios, Schulte's is God. You know, he was so respected, and so he was very influential with the environmental agencies in Colombia. So
he was successful, and you know, they're still desperately poor, and they you know, they have cell phones. As depressing as that is to us, they do have cell phones and they do have the internet, and you know, they need things like money for school and school supplies and soccer balls, and you know, they don't have that sort of thing. But it's still the place itself is you know, at least naturally speaking, is still very much intact. So they other places in the Amazon have a lot of pressure from illegal mining and logging and you know, natural resource extraction, but not so much in the Predio. So it's good for them.
Which reminds me, when I was there, when I was collecting in Peru in 1981, 10 years after we went to La Chorrera, I did return to Peru as a graduate student, and I went down the Amazon and up the Ampyiaco, and there was some discussion about trying to cross the Putumayo and get back to La Chorrera from the south, you know, besides my brother was with me for this part of my expedition. It was an ethnobotanical expedition. We weren't trying to, you know, collapse the space-time continuum this time, and I was very firm about that. My brother was always egging me on, and I'm like, God damn it, this is an ethnobotanical expedition. And if you can't behave yourself, you can leave. You know, I was fairly upset with him at that point for that and a number of reasons. But so we talked about trying to get back to La Chorrera continue on from the Ampyiaco, but we were told at that time that it was very dangerous to go to La Chorrera because it was a major cocaine production, extraction, and transshipping point. Did you hear anything about that when you were there?
No, not that I don't think that's much of an issue anymore. There are these Farc rebels or spin-off Farc groups along the Putumayo. Like, we had no way really of discerning kind of the truth of what we were told, but of course we also had no reason to doubt it. And once you're told that there are potentially Farc rebels kind of waiting in ambush to you know, looking for a couple of gringos to ransom off, we that was enough for us. And we were able to
incentive right there.
We were able to kind of hustle a way out aboard one of these flights, cargo flights. So Dennis, I actually wanted to mention or just ask you about that later journey in 1980, 81. That was I think you write about this, is the Heraclitus.
That's right. That was
Yeah.
the whole Heraclitus debacle or
Yeah.
misadventure. I mean, it was really a misadventure. It just wasn't what we expected. And it's sort of like, well, that's the Amazon. You go to the Amazon and you don't necessarily, it doesn't conform to your expectations, you know.
Yeah.
As it turned out, that has been, you know, when the Heraclitus when the Institute for Ecotechnics sent the Heraclitus to Iquitos, they had managed to bash it into a barge on the way upriver. So it limped into Iquitos, and it was not in any shape to go anywhere. They had to put it into dry dock to repair it. But they had a smaller boat that we were able to take down, and we were able to, hire a collectivo. So we're actually a couple of boats. And actually, Wade Davis was on that trip with me. That's when I really got to know Wade, because the Institute had hired him to be the chief scientific officer for the expedition. And he just showed up one day in Iquitos. And of course, I recognized him because we'd encountered each other in Vancouver. I knew he was connected some way, and he showed up. And we pretty much, were very blessed to have him with us, because he, unlike me and my colleagues, we were not experienced Amazonian travelers, but he knew the ropes and he knew Spanish perfectly. So he went with us up to Pebas, or down the Putumayo, down the Amazon to Pebas, and then up the Ampyiaco. And the reason we were going to the Ampyiaco was because the Witoto people had largely been forced out of La Chorrera to the south, during the rubber boom. And that La Chorrera was kind of an ancestral place for the Witoto, but there were Witoto, Bora, and Muinani communities at around Pucurequillo, up the Ampyiaco. And we were looking for this legendary hallucinogen, but this time in a very focused scientific way. We were, so that's why we went to the Ampyiaco and tried to find people who could make this drug for us. And but the formulation for the drug was kind of a lost art. That they sort of, the informants we talked to said that, well, we sort of remember how our grandfathers did it or our fathers did it. We could take a crack at it, and they did. They didn't regard it as a big secret or giving away knowledge, unlike what Dr. Collier said. They didn't regard it as a big secret, probably because they weren't really part of the tradition, but they were willing to try to make it for us, and they did. They made several samples, and we had Bora and Witoto curanderos that were making it, and we bioassayed all of the samples that we got on on the spot, because, well, that's the job. If you're an ethnopharmacologist, you got to know if the things work. We got, I think, about 7 or 8 samples from different sources, and 2 of them worked quite profoundly. They were very strong. A couple others sort of were active, and the rest were not very active at all that we could perceive. But at least they gave it a try, and so then, I was able to take these samples back to the lab in British Columbia and sort out the chemistry and take a look at the tryptamine profiles in these extracts, and remarkably, there was an exact match between what the informants. We collected a bunch of kumalas. That kumalas are the Verolas. There are many species in that area. We collected samples from a lot of species, and ask the informants, well, is this one strong? Is this one strong? What is their take on them? And they would evaluate them, look at them and taste them, says, yeah, esto es fuerte. This one, not so fuerte, you know. And there was a almost perfect correlation when I got it to the lab between what they said was strong in the presence of these tryptamines. What they said wasn't strong was largely devoid of the alkaloids. So that's kind of a testament to, I guess, folk medicine. They don't have gas chromatographs, but they have taste and smell. And of course, you know, the ultimate bioassay tool, which is the human body. And so anyway, that became half of my thesis, was evaluating these samples of Ukuhé. So, yeah, that was the story.
Dennis, was that your very first time that you found and tried the Ukuhé?
It was, yes, okay. It was. But, you know, when Terence and I went to La Chorrera the first time, we didn't get it, you know, but then he actually went back to La Chorrera. There was a second trip that he made into La Chorrera after I'd come home, after we'd come home, and I went back to college, to the University of Colorado, where I was still an undergraduate. I'd taken a semester off, and I said, you know, after all this crazy adventure and going crazy in the jungle and all that, I said, you know, I just want to study science. I don't want to, you know, I want to get my feet on the ground, basically. Well, he was still totally into the myth. He was chasing the dragon and was convinced that we had almost done it. And so, you know, he and his girlfriend at the time, Ukuhé, they went back to La Chorrera and they spent another 6 months there, you know, and it was a very rough trip. They didn't go on the trail. They went down to the base of, I think it's Igar-Paraná, and then up to Arica. And they stayed at Arica for several months because there was no boat coming by. And it was apparently a mosquito-ridden hellhole. So, but they finally did make it. And on the second trip, they found an informant who gave them one sample of Ukuhé. And I was able to include that in my analysis, even though it was 10 years older than the ones I collected.
Okay. And what, Dennis, was it a snuff? How was it prepared?
It was, well, no, that was the thing. It was not a snuff, right? The varollas are made into snuffs by many tribes, and the sap is extracted and dried down and powdered, mixed with ash and used as a snuff. And the reason it's effective as a snuff is that these tryptamines are not orally active, right? And that was the whole thing about Ukuhé. They didn't make a snuff out of it. They made a paste out of it. They boiled it down, but not to a powder. And then they mixed that with ashes, and it became these little pastillas, these little pills that you would take. And they said, you know, a piece of a sample of this paste, maybe the size of your thumb, was enough. And you would have a very rapid and very strong reaction. And we were interested in all that because, I mean, what had motivated us initially to go after this thing was that Terence and I were both obsessed with DMT. And DMT is not orally active. And when you smoke it, it's extremely short. It only lasts about 20 minutes. And we wanted to find something that we figured if we could find an orally active form, it would last longer, and then we'd be able to spend more time in this place. And we were working under a delusion, effectively, that this was really a portal to another dimension. I mean, we were anything but scientifically rigorous. And at the time, it wasn't understood that ayahuasca is actually an orally active form of DMT. The whole thing about the ayahuasca admixture plants, interaction with the monoamine oxidase inhibitors and all that, this was not understood in 1971 that the admixtures were even important. So we went for this basically on the strength of this paper by Schulte's, which was titled Varola as an orally active hallucinogen. So when we found this paper, we thought, this has got to be it. Let's go there. And we did. We dropped everything. And I dropped out of school. And, Terence was at the time on the lam from Interpol for hashish smuggling out of India, but he was hanging out in Canada. So we went there and we went on this crazy adventure.
Yeah. Well, I asked because in La Chorrera, I met two shamans, mother and a mother and her daughter. And shaman isn't quite the right word. That's not the Witoto word is namarango, which means more like healer, or kind of. No, I don't mean it in a pejorative sense, but kind of a bush doctor, sort of.
Right.
Healer in indigenous medicine, but they did. I actually happened to have Schulte's paper with me. I asked about Ukuhé. It had that 1969 paper with its very beautiful drawing by H.W. Smith, which showed as a snuff.
Right.
And the daughter took the illustration and she kind of took my pen and sketched and narrowed the leaves and kind of drew some serrations out, just corrected that drawing. And scratched out the snuff part. And they prepare it not as a pastille but as she told me anyway, we didn't see it prepared, but she said they prepare it as a tea, almost like like how you would prepare ayahuasca, except there's no admixture.
Yeah, it could be a tea. It could be prepared that way.
Yeah, and we didn't actually lay eyes on the plant. She just said, "Oh, it's over there somewhere in the jungle. It's out in the jungle, kind of." But yeah, it was not a snuff. It was a tea. So I thought that was fascinating.
That's very interesting. Those folks. So were they? But they were not at La Chorrera, and we were, or maybe some of their older relatives were.
Well, as it happens, the husband. So there's some confusion about this. I'd love to be able to figure this out, and I'm not sure if we will be able to. But the older woman, her husband was Bacilio.
You mentioned that to me. Yes.
Yeah. Now he spelled it differently. He spelled it with a U. But he, Terence mentions a Bacilio and True Hallucinations, of course, who takes him in upriver to get some ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca, right?
Yeah. And now this Bacilio, he would have been about 21 at the time. He was married to this woman, this shaman woman. They would have been a young couple then. He claimed to remember you guys, but he had no kind of further memory beyond that. He didn't remember any kind of river journey or being asked for ayahuasca or anything like that, which of course they call yahe, not ayahuasca, right. But anyway, there's a very kind of a tantalizing kind of potential point of connectivity there. I was never able to totally establish beyond that what if there was actually one to you guys, but they lived there then when you guys were there. In fact, their house would have been kind of just uphill from where you were, kind of straight, almost directly west. So kind of downhill from the mission and then to the west, almost forming a kind of L shape between you guys, where the Knoll house was, the mission, and their house. So there was some cross paths there, but I don't know if it's possible to establish any kind of, any narrative beyond that. But
I think that was probably the guy. I mean, his age would have been right. He was about our age at the time. I was 20. You say he was 20, and I never met Bacilio, but I do remember that Terence said, talk to some people in the village, or it was the village, but around there, and about getting some ayahuasca. And then there was a arrangements were made for him to go upriver with this person, Bacilio, and get either they went up there together and they gathered it, or Bacilio brought it. But I remember we had it, and it came from somebody that lived there who went out to get it specifically for us. So that had to be the same guy.
It seems like it. I still have hope of kind of sorting this out, or I'll definitely let you know. I would love to kind of put a exclamation point on that in my book. So, but I'm not sure at this point. Did you guys ever encounter, the drugs that are sort of the drugs of choice there that are really a part and parcel of their whole way of life, or coca and tobacco? And they call coca as mambe. They don't chew the leaves. They ground it into a powder that's, I'm telling you something you already know, I'm sure, but that was something that we encountered quite a bit, was mambe and tobacco. They have a whole maloca set aside just for making mambe, and a great deal of time and energy is spent on that. And it's very kind of serious spiritual implications, and goes right to the heart of their origin stories and so on, and their the whole Witoto cosmology. Did you guys ever encounter that? Was that part of the kind of lingua franca while you were there, or?
Well, yes and no. We encountered it when we did the expedition to the Ampyiaco. Spent time in the Witoto community there, and they were using mambe, and we watched how it was prepared, and it was a whole thing, as you say, it was very important to them. We, in some ways, didn't relate to it, because we thought, well, it's coca, it's no big deal. And we totally misunderstood how significant it was. Since then, I've, largely thanks to Wade Davis, I've come to understand how important it is. I mean, he is really very interested in mambe and uses it himself, almost daily. And we're actually in the process of organizing a forum on coca in Peru, hopefully later this year, because, well, we're getting off topic, but with his help, we're going to have a symposium on coca that will address some of the policy issues around using coca as a medicine rather than the source of cocaine.
Yeah,
but
it's officially illegal in Colombia still.
Right. But
although Wade, yes, is selectively enforced, as Wade says in his book.
Right. No, it's a wonderful thing. I chewed it a little bit. Well, you don't exactly chew mambe, but I tried it a few times when I was on the Putumayo, and it's interesting. I mean, it's a very good thing, and it's a great thing to start your morning off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, as a habitual coffee drinker, I use that, but it has its drawbacks. I think mambe has a future if it could ever be legally, used.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it just has you have that sudden uptick in mood and almost a euphoric kind of feeling, but without this existential crash of cocaine. It just has, it's definitely an acquired taste, but it has this numbing feeling that just feels, it is a little bit like caffeine, in that you do feel it's slightly euphoric, but it's but again, you don't crash, in my experience. So
yeah. Have you read Wade's essay on coca called The Divide Leaf of Immortality?
I haven't, no.
Okay, I'll link you to it. He presented it at our ESPD conference a couple of years ago, and he's given the same talk many places. So it's linked on our website. I'll send you the link. One of the best presentations on coca I've ever seen.
Okay.
Really wonderful presentation. So,
yeah. Dennis, did you ever? You never went back to La Chorrera, right? You just went the one time. You never.
I never went back.
Would you go again?
Not only that, there's flights that go there twice a week now. I mean, I always thought it would be impossible to go back. Yeah. And in some sense, why go back? Because it's not the same place in space or time. It's not this magical place anymore. it has a different kind of magic. I was amused by one of your photographs that you gave that says something like "Mi amor la Chorrera,"
Yep.
all in rainbow colors. That was kind of neat.
Yeah.
We'll put up some of your pictures on the podcast website, and we'll add some of the ones I have from back in the day that one of our members made. You probably looked at them in the book. We've got some great pictures made by Sarah Hartley, who is one of our merry band, and it'll be quite a contrast.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably don't want to go back again. That was one of Hemingway's kind of big takeaways. That when he went back to Monte Cassino, where he was injured during the war and just was disappointed, and same with Palermo. He just, all those. There's the places that were, so formative for him. He wanted to keep them kind of, behind glass in a way, and not have them too disturbed.
I feel the same way. I feel that way somewhat about La Chorrera. I mean, the only reason that we might go back, people keep coming and saying they want to make a movie, about the true hallucinations and so on. Nobody's actually come forward and said they have the resources and the funding and all that. So I tend to say, well, when we can have that conversation when you're ready to do it. But I don't really want to in some ways. I think it should remain a myth, basically, because that's what it is. It's a myth.
Yeah. Can I ask Dennis, when you guys went, you were 20, Terence was 24. And as you had mentioned, Terence was basically on the run for importing hash to Colorado. Your mom had recently passed away.
Yes.
And you had, you guys were kind of children of the 60s of the counterculture. So you have all of this kind of weight of expectation, all this grief bearing down on you as well. And the word you used earlier was, I think you said project or projection. And I wondered how much of all that had kind of prepared you or primed you to have the experience that you guys had. You talk a little bit about this in the book, especially in connection to the passing of your mom, who tragically passed away quite young. And so I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, about your kind of expectations, where you came from and what you expected to find there.
Well, yes. I mean, actually, it was a huge part of the experience, I think. I think that, yes, our mother had passed away the previous October. We were both, of course, very, we were grieving still for her. And because my brother was not able to come into the country at the time, when she was on her deathbed, he was desperately trying to get from Victoria to Grand Junction, Colorado, where she was in the hospital. And, but we were afraid, not knowing the realities of law. We thought that he was an international fugitive. He was wanted by Interpol. What does that mean in the actual context? They're not tracking his every move. He probably could have come in and seen her and left without any problem, because he traveled all over the place after the bust on a false passport, on a passport that he'd gotten from a friend in Japan. But he didn't. And and he was trying to get to see her at that time, and we were desperately trying. And when she died, I was with my dad at the hospital, and we were trying to reach Terence by, there were no cell phones. There was nothing like that. There was no way to reach him, but we were trying to call the airline to tell them to, tell him not to get on the plane, or if he's on the plane, get off the plane, don't come. And of course, if this had happened in the post 9/11 era, it would have instantly been suspicious, and there'd been a lot of scrutiny at that time. Nobody thought about it. But at the end of the day, he ended up not coming. And so when we went to La Chorrera, we were carrying this burden of grief. And I think we both had a lot of guilt about what disappointed children we must have been, to my mom and my dad, because it was the whole drug thing, and you're just hippies, you're just irresponsible drug addicts, and they completely didn't understand about psychedelics, and they were not receptive to it. And so when we went to La Chorrera and did this whole experiment, a lot of it did have to do, at least in my mind, that it was some kind of redemption, that we were going to save our mother, even if we had to tear space-time apart in order to do it. It was a big dynamic. I think it was not exactly articulated as part of the, quote, experimental protocol, but there was the idea that if we succeeded with this, utterly mad goal, well, we'd have all kinds of power at our disposal. We'd be masters of time and space, and bringing back my mom, no problem, And I really think that was a big part of it. I mean, this is not something that I would, it's been so long, I don't really mind sharing it, but that was a part of this grand delusion, effectively, that we were immersed in. It was certainly a part of the idea that if we can do this, we can heal these wounds in our family, and we can bring, our sainted mother back, and it will all be good. It will be a healing experience, and that was a big, if unarticulated, part of it. That was a big part of it. Yeah.
You think Terence felt similarly?
Absolutely. Even more so. I mean, because he was the bigger disappointment.
Right.
I was the good brother. He was the bad brother.
Yeah.
He was the one that led me down all the wrong paths,
Yeah.
For which I'm, of course, extremely grateful, because he was the leader. You've read my book. He was the one that he was the pioneer in a certain case, and a lot of our lives were, in the dynamic of the family. I was the younger brother, and I was the less, I don't know what the term is, I was always in the role of trying to lessen some of the emotional impacts that his selfishness created in our family,
Yeah.
So that was definitely a big part of it.
You guys you write a lot about your early childhood in the book. You write very well of it. You and Terence had a difficult relationship from the very beginning. A lot of kind of tension and combativeness, and some sounds like just outright kind of sadomasochism on his part. And
Yes,
I guess, yeah. It was. I think you refer to it elsewhere as like the brother thing. You guys had this tension even later on in the Rio Ampyiaco, the river of poisons. Was that something that can you speak a little bit about that? Was that something that was ever kind of out in the open and that you ever attempted to resolve, or was it always just kind of permeating beneath the surface? Or
well, it went through phases. Of course, when we were younger, when I was younger and when he was still living at home, he left home early to finish his high school in California. But when he was there was a lot of sibling rivalry, and a lot of, and he was mean, but he was very creative about his meanness, and took a great deal of pleasure in making me miserable. But then, when he left for California, our relationship improved because I didn't see him so much, and we were corresponding. I'd see him at Christmas and in the summertime, and so I was just free to pursue my own thing. And I was passionate about astrophysics and cosmology at the time. That's what I wanted to get into. And at some point, Terence kind of realized, your little brother is not such a bad guy, and he's actually kind of interesting, So we discovered some mutual interests.
Mm.
And then one of which was science fiction, which we shared, from early days. And then when he got into psychedelics, went to Berkeley and took LSD for the first time, discovered DMT, started hanging out with a lot of weird people some of whom I'm still in touch with, in this psychedelic realm. And we were coming at psychedelics not from a particularly an indigenous standpoint or even a ritual or spiritual standpoint. We were coming at it as science fiction geeks, and our experiences with DMT made us think that it was actually a portal to another dimension. That was our model. And maybe it is in some ways, but that was our model, and we wanted to use these drugs to go there.
Yeah.
That is very much part of the La Chorrera dynamic. So we did all that, and we did La Chorrera, and so on. And the interesting thing is, after the experiment, like I said before, I wanted to kind of get back into normal reality and get my feet on the ground. That's why I went back and started studying harder sciences, because one of the things that came up, I'd studied anthropology and comparative religions and all that before, but I wanted to study botany and chemistry and physics and these sort of things. And part of it, the dynamic there was that, after these experiments, Terence asserted that science can never explain this, and we need to reject science. And my response was, well, we don't know that science can't explain it because we're not scientists, and we were deluding ourselves that we were scientists, but we really weren't scientists. And I thought, if you want to reject science, that's fine, but learn what science is and how to do it first. Mm. So that became kind of my stance. Terence, we went to La Chorrera, we had this experience, and I went into a psychotic state for, 2 weeks or so. Eventually, I came back, and it was what the psychologists call a folia do, the folly of two. Terence was in an altered state, which was quite the opposite of mine. He was hyper-focused on this world and hyper-focused on looking after me, and I was busy cruising the cosmos, and but I eventually came down, and in some sense, he never did. In a certain way, he persisted in this understanding these ideas about the time wave, which the core of those ideas came out of the experience at La Chorrera, and he created this whole mathematical construction based on the I Ching, and we wrote the Invisible Landscape together, and which presented that, and in some ways, so he didn't really leave the delusion behind. He managed to persist in the delusion and convince a whole lot of people that he was right, And after the experiment, that was the thing. He said, we were basically right. We were just wrong about when this hyperdimensional object would appear, Other than that, we did it all right. And then, so it became a lot about predicting when this thing was going to show up. When would the stone condense?
Hmm.
And the time for the condensation of that stone eventually got pushed back to December 21st, 2012. That's when it's going to happen. That's when the singularity will manifest based on the time wave. Well, of course, it didn't happen, but that was sort of, and because of that, we're all still here to talk about it. But that
so the experiment kind of led you towards science, but it led Terence and kind of although he had some scientific training, it led him in the opposite direction, basically.
Yeah, he had more or less rejected science. And so he became more of a philosopher and, a public commentator and a raconteur and all the things that his career was about, And then later on, when I discovered, actually, I mean, I have to take credit for it because it does belong to me. I discovered how to grow the mushrooms, in 1975. And it wasn't rocket science. I basically discovered this paper published in Mycologia by a researcher from the USDA, how to grow, it was about how to grow Agaricus bisporus mushrooms in mason jars on sterilized grain, and mostly for small amounts for genetic research and so on. Well, I tried it with the spores that we had brought from La Chorrera. Lo and behold, it worked. And it worked very well. And so that was another inflection point. We had this symbiotic teacher, which we found in La Chorrera, back in our lives again.
Yeah.
And that persisted for many years and really continues in some ways. And then much of what Terence talked about became about talking about the mush. He was totally convinced that, based on what had happened at La Chorrera, he was convinced that it was either the mushrooms or some kind of extra-dimensional or hyperdimensional intelligence that was communicating through the mushrooms, and downloading information. Well, of course, mushrooms do download information. Can't really postulate that it's a hyperdimensional thing. I mean, that this is a conversation that persists. A lot of talk these days in psychedelic circles about the DMT entities. These supposedly non-human intelligences that you encounter. Are they real or not? Well, they are real because you experience them, but are they from another dimension or from the unconscious? I don't think we could really answer that. Mm. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten more curmudgeonly and reductionist, and I tend to say these are products of the imagination. Mm. That doesn't mean that it does not invalidate them. The experiences are real. They do not come from another dimension.
Yeah. Dennis, as far as you know, were you the first one? I've heard this stated before, and I feel like it's unfact checkable, but are you the first one to figure out how to grow psilocybin mushrooms in the United States? And that 1975, was that you, or was it done before?
No, I was not the first one. There were a lot of people working on this at the time, and actually the whole methodology had been developed when Hoffman was, working on growing the mushrooms. They managed to grow them in the laboratory. And there were other people, some of them were our friends, were trying to figure out how to grow them at the time. What Terence and I did was we found this very simple method that just about anybody could do, and we wrote the book. We wrote this psilocybin magic mushroom grower's guide under pseudonyms. That had a societal impact.
Yeah.
That was something that was accessible to everybody. We published, it was no more than a little pamphlet, really, but we published it. and a lot of people got their hands on it. And then essentially we put the tools into the hands of many people to grow these things. And I think that had a larger impact on society because it made, this non-toxic, absolutely profound psychedelic available to anybody with a little patience and a spare basement, if they wanted to try it. And many, many thousands of people did. And I think in some ways it set the stage for the receptivity to mushrooms that we're seeing now with the so-called psychedelic revolution. Because mushrooms were widely available from the mid-70s if you knew where to go or if you knew how to grow it.
And before that, they were kind of a novelty item, right? I mean, you could get LSD, but it was hard, or mescaline, but harder to come by, were magic mushrooms. You guys had never tried them before La Chorrera, I believe, right? Or before Florencia.
Right. We tried them when on the way into La Chorrera. Once at Florencia, I didn't try them then. There was only one or two specimens that we stumbled across. And Terence ate those. And then at Porto Leguísimo, again, we found them. And then we took them. And that was my first experience with the mushrooms. And these were probably fairly low doses, and they were great. I mean, they were a lot of fun, and they were very, profound in a certain sense. I mean, they stimulate ideas. I don't know if you've had psilocybin mushrooms, but if you have, you know how they can be. I mean, they can be extremely profound and, spiritual, mystical experience and all that. At lower doses, though, they're just like cognitive stimulators. They just stimulate ideas and speaking. They sort of activate this poetic insight, ability in people, like they say about Maria Sabina. I don't know if you've read the essay called the Mushrooms of Language.
No.
In this,
I thought you were gonna say Gordon Wasson's article, but no, I haven't. The Mushrooms of Language.
Mushrooms of Language was an essay in a anthology, I think, edited by Peter First.
Okay.
Hallucinations and Culture, which was appearing about that time.
Okay. Dennis, this is going back a ways, but can I ask you to talk a little bit about your Catholicism? That was fairly big deal for mom and dad, but but early point of rebellion for you and Terence, as far as I can tell. Was that like a kind of a big deal in your household, and another kind of point of tension between you and your parents? Or?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we were both Terence and I think, pretty vigorously rejected Catholicism at the time when many people do, adolescence, puberty. I mean, I was a good Dogan for a long time. I really believed, and I was an altar boy, and all of those things. And but eventually, I just it just didn't ring true for me at all, and I came to the realization that it's a fairy story, and I rejected it, and and that was a point of tension to some degree in our family. But by that time, there were already so many other terrible things we were guilty of. That was kind of lost in the shuffle,
Yeah. Was Terence the kind of guiding hand that led you to psychedelics, or would you have gotten there on your own, do you think?
Given the culture of the time, I'm pretty sure I would have gotten there on my own. Yeah. I mean, it was pervasive. There was, but not in the same way. A lot of people kind of encountered psychedelics because it was a popular thing and everybody was doing it and so on. But for us, it was more serious because of our delusional beliefs about it, basically, because of our beliefs that what it was, we approached it somewhat differently. It was not casual or recreational for us, and it was, but it was curiosity is what drove us to it. Curiosity drives a lot of people to investigate a lot of things they probably shouldn't, but then if nobody did it, we would know a lot less than we know. So
yeah,
just like that.
I asked because I'm curious. I wanted to ask how exactly you guys imbibed the counterculture of the 60s and 70s. Was it from the predominantly the sex, drugs, and rock and roll side of things, or was it from the SDS, Weathermen, Black Panthers, we're going to have a revolution kind of thing, or was it kind of somewhere in the middle, or how would you place it your drug use on that kind of continuum?
Yeah, we were, aware of the politics and all that, and we were demonstrating against the war and all of those things. We were definitely lefty. We were somewhat into the counterculture. Terence possibly more than I was, because he went to, he left for California in, I think, 1962, and then he went to Berkeley, and it was all happening. I went to visit him in Berkeley in 1967, which was the summer of love. All the hippies were coming to San Francisco. So we were into it in that sense. We were part of this cultural shift. But for myself, and I think for Terence to a certain extent, I think we also kept a certain distance from it. We fancied ourselves intellectuals, and maybe we were intellectuals in a certain sense. The counterculture was not particularly intellectual. I mean, there were intellectuals, but there wasn't, there was Timothy Leary as a cultural icon and kind of the propagator of the wisdom, or the promoter of psychedelics. It took a while for us to really find other people that were not quite so flamboyant, but maybe more serious. People like Schultes, for example, and Albert Hoffman, and some of those people. So there was that element that a lot of countercultural hippies, deeply immersed countercultural hippies, didn't really know about or think about or care about. So there was this element of, I guess in some ways, we thought of ourselves as not quite part of the tribe, and even to this day, I would have to say, I don't think of myself as a tribalist. I'm not so immersed. For example, I should be ashamed to admit this, but I'm not. But for example, I've never been to Burning Man. Right. I have no intention of going to Burning Man.
Yeah.
Not interested.
Yeah, that makes two of us.
Yeah. But then it's like that's almost a badge of shame. Of course, Burning Man has now morphed into basically a corporate kind of event. It doesn't have, it had its roots in the counterculture, but now it's been co-opted by the tech bros and all that. I have no interest in any of that,
Yeah. Dennis, did you guys was quote unquote revolution? Was it on your mind when you went to La Chorrera, however you want to take that word? Was that something that kind of was in the works, or
the political revolution?
Cultural revolution, yeah, however you want to.
I think a big motivator when we went to La Chorrera was that we'd given up on all that. We'd kind of given up on political revolution as an answer to the problems that we were facing, or even the cultural revolution. That was why we thought, again, if this thing with DMT, if what we thought was true of DMT, that will change everything, and it will make all of this irrelevant. because it's going to change, the very nature of ontology.
Yeah.
And so that was a big motivator. Like, we thought, this is more important. If this is really, a way to connect with some other dimension, then that's far more important than all this political movement and the cultural movements. And of course, well, actually, we don't know really what it is, but I mean, I don't think of psychedelics in that way. I do think that psychedelics have, obviously, as we've seen in the last decade or so, they have great therapeutic potential. I think that they are symbiotic partners, with our species, mushrooms, and all of these things. Indigenous people always have regarded them that way, and I think, I think the indigenous traditions, the indigenous knowledge traditions of using these things, is the reflection of thousands of years of cultural history. They probably have it more or less right, but I'm not indigenous. You're not indigenous. We can't just ape these practices, but we can appreciate them, and we can borrow from them, and we can acknowledge, that ancestral wisdom. I think that is the right way to approach these substances. I'm all for science. I think that science should investigate these things. I am not, I don't agree with people that think it all has to be, they have to be used in a clinical context. I mean, if you're using them for specific medical purposes, you use them in a clinical context, but these substances can benefit the well. You do not have to be, have a mental disorder or a mental problem to benefit from them, because they're learning tools, and they're ways to explore consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's what they're used for. And then there are people who, the whole people that think that the DMT entities are out there, or the psychedelic, the machine elves and so on. I think my brother coined the term machine elf with respect to DMT. I have to tell you, I've never seen a machine elf myself. I've seen lots of things, but not those.
That's hilarious. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's an awful lot of that right now in the kind of psychedelic renaissance. I think we were both at the Psychedelic Science Conference last June, and there was a lot of, I mean, I thought, I wanted to talk to you about your thoughts on that. You sort of just answered my question, but there was a lot of, good stuff there. I thought, like, good science and some sane people, but, very sane, kind of smart, accomplished people, but also a lot of, in my experience, a lot of kind of wild and unsubstantiated claims being made about these drugs and their potential uses. So, but what do you think? What do you think Terence would have made of all that if you were alive today and doddering around the Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver last summer? What do you think his impression would have been?
Well, I think his impression would have been similar to mine. Pleased in some ways and appalled in other ways. I mean, I think we'd both be happy that psychedelics are getting recognized for the important medicines that they are, for the important substances that they are, and that's good. That's long overdue. I mean, it's good. They should never be prohibited. That was completely wrong-headed. But I think we'd be. I mean, I know I have reservations about the corporatization of psychedelics, and the venture capitalists have jumped on all this and want to make billions of dollars. And they want to develop new compounds that they can patent, which are actually not better than the natural compounds. Their sole virtue being that they're patentable. And now there are certain segments of the research, corporate research community that are trying to develop non-psychedelic psychedelics, which is just, to my mind, completely wrong-headed, a complete misunderstanding, of what psychedelics do. I do not think you can separate the experience from the therapeutic effect. You can't make a compound that has no perceivable psychological effect and yet will reset your receptor systems and suddenly, cure your trauma or your intractable depression or so on. You have to have the experience in order to do that. That's an intrinsic part of the therapeutic effect. And for that, you have to have the right set and setting. Leary was right about that. Set and setting is more as important as the medicine. To take a psychedelic, you've got really 4 variables. You've got the medicine, whatever it might be. You've got the dose. You've got the, you have the setting and the set. The setting and the set, well, the setting has to be compatible with having the experience. The set is in some ways the most important element because the set is what you bring to it. The set is you. It's not just your expectations or your intention. It's everything, your whole life experience that you bring to this occasion of this intensely personal encounter with a part of yourself that's not normally accessible. And so set and setting, dose and medicine, all of these things are variables that are important. And I think they're all essential for any kind of therapeutic or spiritually satisfying experience.
Yeah. I've talked to a lot of people there at that conference who were dismayed by the rush to cash in on these plants. And there was some, that almost half of that whole top part of the conference all was taken up by different companies looking to, some of them are fairly benign, but maybe others arguably not so. But it'd be interesting to see where things go in the next few years. Really quickly, even maybe painful to discuss, but about Terence's death. You write quite beautifully about it in the book, but I've sort of heard that there are these kind of rumors passed around about Terence, his last days, and at the very end, the last 2 days before he died, that he had this kind of healing moment that he had not, I think, touched. This is what I've heard, so please forgive me if I'm totally off base here, but that he had more or less forswore psychedelics for the better part of a decade. He had had this bad trip and then kind of forsook them. And then, but before he died, he had this kind of, what I've been told is this quote unquote healing moment. Is that your recollection of things? Do you have any thing to kind of any clarification there, or?
Well, he had forsworn psychedelics for almost a decade, and when he was in the latter stages of his life, my friend Eduardo Luna and myself, Eduardo's work close friend of Terence's, we tried to urge Terence to do psychedelic therapy, to take at least a moderate amount of psilocybin. We had access to some pure psilocybin. I was afraid to give it to him in the state. In ayahuasca, I didn't want to. I was afraid it might be too stressful on his body. He took low doses, but he was not really with the program, at that point. And so I didn't press it. He was not able to have a profound psychedelic experience close to his death, or if he did, it wasn't with me, and I don't think it was. He was just reluctant to do it.
Yeah. And did he suspect that his drug use had anything to do with his? I've read that also, that he suspected his drug use had something to do with his tumor. Is that right?
his drug use had to do
Yeah.
with tumor.
Yeah, he suspected it was related. Was that? No.
I don't think so. I don't think he never articulated that to me, or it may have come up, but even his oncologist, when it came up, said, it has nothing to do with your psychedelic use.
Yeah.
It's something that happens to people. You happen to be one of those people, that fate came along and tapped you on the shoulder and said, it's your time. I think that's exactly right. I don't think it had to do with his use of psychedelics at all.
Yeah.
My wife as a causative.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife is a doctor, and she said pretty much the same thing. That's not how that works. But I was just curious to know whether Terence kind of, how much he believed that or not at all, it sounds like.
I don't think so. I don't think he believed that.
Last question, Dennis, and maybe a weird one, but was the word, this is a new book by Mike J. now called Psychonaut. I don't know if you've seen it, but he really parses at length the whole history of psychedelic drug use. And that word in particular, was that a word, Psychonaut, that was on your guys' lips when you went to La Chorrera? Did you think
Back
of yourself?
In the day? No.
Yeah. No.
No. That's a neologism. I think that's a pretty recent term. Yeah. I guess it's a good term. I mean, the idea that that the world of the unconscious, it is a universe, and these are chemical starships, and we can travel into that universe. That's one way of looking at it. Psychonauts, I don't know. It's kind of a charged term, It's kind of a macho assertion of a certain bravery that really, I think these experiences should be approached with humility, and I think we need to realize, and this ayahuasca very often reminds me, remember how little you know.
Yeah.
People say, what have you learned from all these years of taking psychedelics? I've learned how little I know.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you so much, Dennis, for speaking with me. I really appreciate it. It's been terrific.
It's been a wonderful conversation, John. I hope we can revisit it. Let me know when your book is coming out, and we'll get you back on, and I'll let you know as soon as this thing is posted. I'm so appreciative. This did not go where I thought it was going to go. It was a much better place.
Oh, good. Great. I'm glad to hear it. Well, thank you, Dennis. I hope we'll stay in touch, and let me know if you need anything else. I'm happy to send you more photos of La Chorrera. I've got some video. The guy who was with me was a friend of mine from here is a filmmaker. He took some film. So there's a lot there if you need it. So just let me know.
Yeah. All right.
Well, thank you, sir. Take care.
Enjoy your afternoon and enjoy your kids, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Dennis. Take care.
Bye-bye. Hello. This is Dennis McKenna, and I would like to introduce you to the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy, and also our YouTube channel under the same name, where we're presenting the Brain Forest Cafe podcasts. We hope that you will listen to some of those, watch them, and subscribe. If you like the ideas we're presenting, the Academy is interested in presenting stimulating educational content. Our vision is a world in which all sentient beings live together in symbiotic harmony, and we do try to achieve this through education, engagement with indigenous cultures, and ethnobiological explorations. So we appreciate your donations and support. We urge you to subscribe to the Brain Forest Cafe and share it and the content with your friends. And we're very happy for your support. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you very much.